Okay, so the reunification of the East and West. We start off with the fall of Rome in 476, and you're left with a disconnection between the East and the West. You have this cultural disconnection, and you have this loss of secular tradition. You end up with these language and cultural barriers because in the East, they have one type of language and one type of culture. In the West, you have another type of language and another type of culture. And there seems to be no connection between the two. This is very similar to what's happening in the world today. Like I already talked about in the previous sections, that we in the West don't really understand the countries and civilizations in the East, and we feel like they don't understand us. And we're kind of at odds with each other. And it's not a matter of should we adopt their way of life or should we push our way of life on them. That's not the case at all. But how do we properly exchange value? How do we be good neighbors? Because in a globalist society, in a society where the blank edges of the map have all been filled in and we're all somehow connected, especially through this internet age, we want to be able to understand our neighbors. We want to be able to be good neighbors to them. And we can't really be a good neighbor if we don't actually understand a little bit of where they're coming from. This is something that the Renaissance really understood. And there was something that happened in the year 1054, a monumental thing that really changed the entire course of history of the entire world. And this is the schism of the church. And basically what happened is there was so much differences that were happening through these loss of connection between the Latin speaking and the Greek speaking worlds, that there was, because basically Christianity was, the prominent religion. Paganism had essentially died. But what was happening though is Christianity was developing here and Christianity was developing here, but there was different cultural things that were happening and different languages that were being used to articulate these ideas. And around 1054, this is maybe about 500-600 years after the fall of Rome, where the differences in the languages and the cultures led to actually a differences of beliefs and a differences of practices between the East and the West sides of the church. And those differences became so great that there was some decisions were made within the church where they declared these differences are actually irreconcilable, and they split. And so Rome, they go their own way. This is what we know today as Roman Catholicism. And then the church in the East, they stick with what they were doing all along, and that's what we know today as Eastern Orthodoxy, or the Orthodox Catholic Church. And even today, we still in the West Eastern Orthodoxy is just so distant to us because Protestantism branched off of the Catholic Church, and so it's so far disconnected from these ancient Greek churches, like the churches that they actually talk about in the Bible, like the churches of Antioch and the churches of Jerusalem and Constantinople and all of that. We don't understand exactly what they were doing just because there's so much of a cultural difference. And this really all happened right around the year 1054. And so whenever the Byzantine Empire is still going, they're able to preserve and expand on these classical ideas. They're able to preserve and expand on the Greek philosophy. And if you go into a lot of the Eastern Orthodox churches over in the East, you'll see pictures of Plato and the Greek philosophers up on the walls. Now, they don't have halos around them because they're not regarded as saints. But they realized that these Greek philosophies actually, they were really explaining the way the world works in a profoundly true and meaningful way. And that these are actually, they're not antithetical to Christianity. And that they actually help explain some of the points that we're trying to make through Christianity. And so this is something that the Roman Catholics were very disconnected from. That the Greeks at the time were able to really incorporate the Greek philosophy and find common ground between the two of them, where in the West that just didn't happen. And then this split between the two, between the East and the West, it got even worse whenever the Crusades started happening. So basically, Jerusalem goes in and out of control of who controls Jerusalem. They've been fighting over that area since the beginning of human time, and they're still fighting over this area today. And so the Roman Catholic Church in the West keeps on wanting to go and recapture Jerusalem. Something really dark happened during the Fourth Crusade. I'm not going to get into all the details. That's a topic for another day. But basically, over in Rome, they say, let's go back and recapture Jerusalem. Somehow, along the way, all these crusaders are going to march to Jerusalem to reconquer the Holy Land, and somehow they get sidetracked and they attack Constantinople instead. And they end up just massacring lots of Eastern Orthodox Christians, raping the nuns, all sorts of terrible, horrific things. And this just like solidifies the divide in the church, where it's like, look, we're totally irreconcilable now. We're like killing each other over these differences in ideas. And it's way too much to get into how that got sidetracked, how deep these differences were. But just understand, the Fourth Crusade was like the nail in the coffin of like, we're so different. The Roman Catholicism is so different than the Eastern Orthodox that we can't even get along to where we're ended up killing each other then. And so that was really the time whenever Constantinople was so weakened by this attack. Although the empire goes on for another 250 years, it just never recovers. Now, in Florence, at the time whenever the Renaissance was happening, is a little bit before the fall of Constantinople, there was a lot of wealthy families, the Medici in particular, and they realized, look, this is not good what's happening in the Christian world. We can't have these disconnections between the East and the West. We have to find ways to bridge our gap, because we all want to be centered on Christ. We all want to be centered to our main orienting mechanism. We all want to be focused on the same thing. And we're letting these cultural differences get in the way. And so what they really wanted to do was to find a way to bring the church back together, to restore this unity between the East and the West. And this was a cultural thing, but it was also a profoundly religious idea, was to restore, because basically the idea of restoring the Roman Empire, that was dead. But the one thing that they thought that they could pull off, at least, was a restoration and a reunification of the church. And they tried so many different times to get this together. And this was going on for about 30 years, this council that they were trying to have, where they were trying to bring all these people together, the elders from the church in the West, the elders in the church in the East, and try to find, let's get together and work out our differences, guys. And it was a big deal to try to do that. Because, I mean, imagine a bunch of 60, 70, 80-year-old dudes traveling hundreds of miles to a different city. I mean, a lot of these people would die on the way. So it's not like they just had councils just for the fun of it. It was a huge deal to try to have a council. And a lot of it was just like how expensive it was to feed and house all of these people. And so there was a wealthy family. Lorenzo de' Medici was the head of the Medici family at the time, basically the leader of Florence. He said, look, guys, we need this reunification so much that what we're going to do is I'm going to personally fund the council, and let's go have the East and the West meet here in Florence. Florence will be the city for that. It will be the symbol of the reunification of the East and the West. Unfortunately, this didn't work out. It's really weird. We could go, that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day of all the details of what happened with the Council of Florence. But essentially, the Constantinople was under threat from the Ottoman Empire. And I think it was the Ottoman Empire and the Muslim people, and they were trying to go basically overthrow and attack the Eastern Orthodox nations. And so all these Eastern Orthodox people go over to Florence and they ask Rome, they say, hey, look, can we please get some military support for our city so we could preserve our empire or preserve our kingdom? And they said, yes, we just need to agree to X, Y, and Z. Here's all the differences. If you agree to X, Y, and Z, we'll send you military support. And miraculously, they agreed. And they said, yes, we'll go with what you're saying. We'll accept all of these new Roman Catholic doctrines. We just want this army to be sent to protect us. Then all these elders go back to Florence and they're like, hey guys, we've agreed to all the Roman Catholics' terms. But the lay people of the church says, absolutely not. We have been unbroken in our tradition since the very beginning, and we're not going to adapt these principles just for military aid. So they ended up rejecting their elders' decisions, and they said, look, we're better off without an army. We just have to stick with the tradition. And this is actually somehow a wise decision, and this might be getting a little bit into too much of the weeds of what's happening around the fall of Constantinople. But whenever the Muslims eventually did conquer Constantinople and Constantinople fell, they did let the Eastern Orthodox continue going about with their own faith in their own way, and the faith was able to be preserved. And they actually had much greater religious freedom under the Muslims than they did under the Roman Catholics. So somehow the lay people were onto what actually was able to preserve the faith. It's really just, I mean, it's quite a miracle of how that happened. But this is getting too much into the weeds of all the little details. Essentially, what we need to know is that in Florence, they thought it's extremely important to have the Greek ideas incorporated into it. We can't keep having this separation between the East and the West. This makes us weak. So all these Greek scholars, they go and they migrate over to, they migrate over and they land to the West, and they land a lot in Florence. And what happens during this Council of Florence and with all these migration of all these Greek scholars is all these wealthy people now, they're like, whoa, what's all this Greek stuff about? What's happening in the East? This is just so cool. And there's this cultural curiosity that starts to flourish in the area. And Greek, like speaking Greek becomes the new cool thing to do. And everyone wants to learn how to speak Greek. Everyone wants to go learn Plato. That's whenever you get the Greek revival and the Platonic Academy. And then they have this Silk Road that's made where they are able to trade back and forth with the East and the West. And so they're trading all of these luxury goods back and forth. And so whenever they're sending these luxury goods, they're sending their goods over to the East, they're actually going and bringing knowledge back with these luxury ideas that they're importing back from the East. And so they're not just trading like material things, they're trading ideas too. And this is something that they find incredibly valuable. They're like, look, I want to get my hands on as much information as possible. I don't care where it comes from. I just want to figure out what's useful. And so they all were like, let's go figure out what the Greeks were doing. So whenever you get this new opening back up of the world, despite the split of the church, in the secular world, there was this cultural curiosity. There was this allowance and acceptance of ideas that coming from a foreign land. And one of the things I think is important to note about this trade, and we'll get into this much later with like the preservation of your own particular city and your family through like keeping your staples produced, like keeping all of the food and like the major things that you need to survive, like produce all of that in your own land. They're not trading things that they would necessarily need for survival. It's all like luxury, exotic stuff. But that's the stuff that to them is the most interesting. It's like, look at the stuff that we could build that they didn't know how to build. They're really fascinated with that. And we could actually get a higher dollar amount sending it over to them. And they could get a higher dollar amount from us by sending over their exotic stuff to us because we think that's exotic. They think our stuff is exotic, so on and so forth. So they're really trading back and forth like the cream of the crop with each other. They're giving each other their best ideas and their best products. And this really helps get the idea of why they, or what exactly was happening in Florence with this. Let's trade things. Let's trade ideas. Let's figure out what exactly are they doing over there? Not like, let's just demonize them and say there's something wrong. Let's figure out what works over there. Is there anything that we could work that applies to our own life? So I want to end section 2, reunification of the East and the West, with 2 quotes from ancient history. The first one is by Herodotus. And he says, if anyone, no matter who, were given the opportunity to choose from all the nation's customs whatever seemed best, he would examine them all and in the end choose his own. Yet, by observing others, we may learn to improve our own ways. And so this is not the idea of the reunification of the East and the West. Like I said many times, it's not about let's just totally adopt everything that we have and that they have and discard everything that we have going on. Or it's not like let's impose our will on them. Clearly, you want your own homeland's way, your own heritage to flourish. You want to preserve that. But that doesn't mean that you can't learn and observe what they're doing and find ways to improve on your own ways. The second quote is a quote from Strabo. He was another person from ancient antiquity who was known for his profound writings. And his quote about this idea of reunification of the East and the West and learning from distant cultures goes like this. By traveling and trading with distant peoples, we gain not only their goods, but their ideas, which broaden our knowledge and make us wiser in our own affairs. So I think there's really something that we could learn from what exactly are the Chinese people thinking about? What exactly goes through the Russian person's mind? What are their priorities? Because we can't just label these as like bad people just because it's different. Because that would be unfair for them to label us as bad people just because we're different. We have things that they could learn and they have things that we could learn. And by learning these things, we could actually become wiser in our own affairs and we could actually improve in our own ways. And this becoming wiser and this constant improving, all of this leads into idea number 3, the rise of the merchant class.